coming under sort of different circumstances where I usually visit Duluth, but it's good to be back, fog and all, and good to see everyone. And I want to talk about something that has not gotten a lot of attention as it should over the last few months, and I think Brittany understands. And it kind of reminds me of the fact that domestic violence has always, from the past, been a hidden crime and something that no one focused on or gave enough attention to, and we've changed that over the years, and Safe Haven Shelter is part of changing that culture, because if you pretend things don't exist, a lot of times these crimes that occur behind closed doors just keep getting worse. And the fact that this shelter is so prominent right here near the courthouse is really, really important. Secondly, we have a proud tradition in Duluth of handling domestic violence cases in a nationally renowned way, of making sure that we acknowledge them and that we prosecute them, but that also we do everything we can that this doesn't happen again. The third thing is that during the pandemic, we have seen an increase in domestic violence calls to hotlines and cases, and this would make intuitive sense, because you've got a situation where people are stuck in the same house and it's very hard for victims to make even phone calls to ask for help. They oftentimes have to then go outside the house to make the call or run down to the basement or do something so that the perpetrator doesn't hear them. And we've seen a major increase in actually the first weeks when the pandemic started, and it makes these shelters more and more important. So in the first piece of legislation, the CARES Act, I advocated on a bipartisan basis, actually, with the Republican senator from Alaska, Lisa Murkowski, for funding. We were able to get $670,000 just for Minnesota in increased funding for domestic violence. That money is with the state and is going out to local shelters and other places, and we got to make sure that money gets out. The second thing is, right in front of us is another piece of legislation called the HEROES Act that passed the House that has significant funding for domestic violence. And I talked to the mayor yesterday and have talked to some of the local leaders around Duluth, and overall we know how important it is to get the local funding, not just for the big cities, but for the mid-sized cities as well. And that's what we're working on, that bill. And that's not just about domestic violence. There'd be over $900 billion in funding for the country for local units of government and helping with all the needs in Duluth, and we need to pass that. We also need to pass the Domestic Violence Act, a bill that has been sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk for over a year. It's a bill that passed the House of Representatives that I worked hard on in the Senate, and that bill is just sitting there waiting for action, and that would also help. So my main points here are that we have seen an increase in domestic violence. It is becoming even more, once again, sadly, the hidden crime, because everyone's behind their doors. We have to make sure that we don't lose the ground that we've made in terms of taking these cases seriously and making sure, wait for this to go, and making sure that victims have a place to go. And that place to go are places like this shelter, but we cannot lose that in this pandemic. And that's why we're so focused on making sure we get more funding, and that we especially get more funding for places like Duluth, and we continue the unemployment help, which at least can keep a family financially secure. And with that, I turn it over to Brittany. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Klobuchar. I really appreciate the effort that you made to come up to Duluth on this beautiful Duluth day. You know, here at Safe Haven, we recognize that so much of your effort has gone into protecting victims of domestic violence and keeping them safe. And the efforts that you've made, both bipartisan and within the Democratic Party, to perpetuate those efforts has not gone unrecognized. So thank you so much for that. That being said, we have statewide recognized that domestic violence efforts are even more so a concern, because our administration nationally has not been very supportive of our efforts, and so we are concerned now more so than ever about what our future might look like. And so to have your support in moving those efforts forward is always very much appreciated. We have seen an increase in the need for our services because of the pandemic. We saw a significant increase in the need for really dramatic on-the-spot hotline call services right when COVID became our buzzword of the day. And so we responded to all of those calls for help and support as immediately as we were able. We helped people do safety planning, because as they thought about what their lives might look like in their homes, we knew that they were concerned about being with their abusive partners on a more tragic and frightening scope, because they did not have an option to leave and they did not have an option to escape. And so we provided safety planning in the early days, and then we started to think really creatively about what our efforts could look like and what we could do to transpose our advocacy services. And so we met survivors where they were at, and we promoted our services in places that people were able to go. And so we reached out to our local partners at gas stations, at grocery stores, at places where folks were able to reach out, and we posted our phone number and people were able to continue to call. We've thought about ways that we can continue to serve folks in our shelter program by providing appropriate distancing, and so we've relied on our local partners at hotels to be able to space folks out, and we've really relied on the efforts of technology to be able to continue to offer tele-advocacy services and provide that one-on-one advocacy support through video conferencing, and kind of thinking about our work in new and innovative ways. And one of the things that I think I can speak on behalf of all advocacy agencies throughout the state when I say that I'm so proud to work in this field every day, when I see the nimbleness of the advocates on the front lines and the creative ways in which they modify their work to be able to reach survivors and serve survivors in new and creative ways every single day. And so it's only with the support of legislation that supported by Senator Klobuchar that we are able to continue that work. And we thank you all so much for your support, and we look forward to serving survivors now and tomorrow and for as long as they'll need us.
Okay. Any questions you guys have before you freeze? Anything?
Yeah, I guess I'll start off by asking, are you guys able to provide, numbers as to how much that increase has been in those phone calls compared to the usual calls you guys get?
Carly?
Increases.
So we'll try to get those numbers for you, because that was part of the reason we got the funding immediately, because of the increase in the calls. And then there's also people who are clearly, there was a murder case in Maple Grove where the guy just recently out in the suburbs in the Twin Cities, where the guy literally hid the body of his wife in the crawl space under the house. So you're just starting to see these cases. Sometimes it goes on for a while and then there's a death or the victim comes forward. And so it doesn't always happen right away. But we know for sure that during certain times of the year when people are more cooped up in their houses, that you see increases during holidays, things like that. And so all of that would lead to this notion that during a pandemic it's going to be tougher for victims to find a place to go. And they also don't want to get coronavirus, so they don't quite know what to do. It's harder to go to emergency rooms. It's harder to go to other places, and they've got their kids. So there's all kinds of hard stuff about this for victims who might normally just be able to get in a car and go somewhere. It's harder to do.
And Alejandra, I can send you some local numbers if that would be.
Yeah, local numbers would be good. Yeah. No, you're going to get them. Oh, I thought you had them. Okay.
Oh yeah, no,
Okay.
I can.
Okay.
In the HEROES Act, the funding piece, how does that work and how is it being introduced so that
Sure.
cities like Duluth and
Exactly.
get funded?
So the HEROES Act, first of all, there's the big major funding that the mayor and others are focused on, and the governor. That's over $900 billion, but that's for everything, for cities, states, to deal with increased first responder costs, not just domestic violence by any means. It is everything, and the hospitals and everything else. And that's what we're so worried about, because if you remember, the president had said, oh, the states could just go bankrupt. Well, that's not really true. And that's why we got an initial bunch of funding out to the states, but because there's still such high unemployment, we need to make sure we get the money out so the states and the cities don't go under. And that's one of the biggest parts about the funding that just came and passed the House of Representatives that we're working on to get through the Senate, and why we're going to be going back next week. As part of that big bill, there is $100 million in domestic violence funding for hotlines, for shelters, for the prosecution of cases. And that's the part that would funnel down to Minnesota through the states and then to the local governments. One of the good things about this HEROES Act that just passed the House is that it includes mid-sized cities like Duluth and smaller cities. It's not just about the big cities. And while the rates of COVID may not be as high in this county, what we do know is the economy is hit as hard, as we could see from some of the recent closures of some of the businesses here, some temporarily, some permanently, which is what I was talking to the mayor about. And so what does that mean? One, you need the funding, because the city is going to need help to keep transportation and everything going. Two, big time, you need the unemployment benefits, and what we've done is put $600 more a week out to workers. And that's where, like, when you have workers laid off here at Essentia or on the Iron Range from the iron ore mines, they get that extra $600 a week. And what we've seen in the northern part of our state, in the Northland, is an increase in unemployment right now. So that may be regardless of where our COVID numbers are, the economy is still hit, right? And so that's why we want to make sure that we pass this bill and the president signs it into law, which is about overall funding for Duluth, for the state, unemployment benefits. We've got to get that done. And the state-city portion is over 900. Domestic violence is just a smaller piece of it, but very important.
How has your services changed with the COVID-19 with regarding removing women or their children from the homes and getting them?
Yeah, our services have changed quite dramatically. At first we saw a pretty significant uptick in the number of hotline calls we received. So we sort of felt this panic at first. We felt the panic of our community. We saw about an 11% increase in the number of hotline calls in the first weeks of the community's COVID response. And so we addressed those calls by doing some kind of really prompt safety planning with people. The response we were hearing is that we know we're going to be at home with our abusive partners. We don't know what we're going to do. And so help me figure this out. Help me navigate my new normal in being with my abuser. He is now going to be home with me all of the time. And so our hotline calls for safety planning really went up significantly. And then kind of over the next couple of weeks, we invited a lot of people into our shelter. Our shelter is always full. And so we, typically hover right around 40, 45 people in our shelter. So that's moms and their children. all at one time, and so we were over full quite significantly, and we did our best to welcome as many people as we could. We made referrals to other parts of the state that did have open space, so we just plugged up all of the holes in the shelters so that we could house as many people as we were able before the stay-at-home order went into effect. And then after the stay-at-home order went into effect, we became really highly concerned because we knew that that was going to be the most dangerous time for people, because isolation is one of the most tragic tactics that abusers typically use as far as controlling their victims and kind of further limiting their access to supportive services. And so what we saw at that point was an even more concerning decrease in, I'm going to wait 1 second, in the number of calls that we were receiving. So we went from this spike to this plummet, and the number of calls that we were receiving went from, we would expect a pretty substantial plateau, and we dropped about 60%. And so we know that survivors are even being isolated to the point of not being able to make a call. And so we've tried to reach out to survivors in so many different ways, and like I mentioned before, trying to reach them where we know that they will be. And so posting signs in public places that have our number really prominently displayed, and having numbers to other statewide hotlines and the National Domestic Violence Hotline available so that folks know that there are multiple ways that they can reach out, having numbers that folks can text, having a really big push for social media so that folks know that they can reach out, and then having different strategies available to them so that they know that they don't necessarily have to go onto our social media and say, hey, I need help because I'm in a domestic violence situation, but even doing something as simple as sending an innocuous message like, hi stranger, how are you, it's been a while, and kind of knowing that that would be our cue to reach out to them and rely on us to, again, kind of use that nimbleness that we've all acquired over time as advocates to be able to respond to them effectively and kind of field their need and respond to what would be most effective and most helpful for them in their particular situation. So the other thing that we've tried really hard to do is stay as much ahead of responding to what survivors are going to continue to need as we can. So in terms of managing the COVID crisis itself, our shelter was built 20 years ago to be a communal place of healing and peer support, and so our shelter is very wide open, and it's beautiful and wonderful for that purpose, so that survivors can rely on each other and lean on each other, and their kids can be with each other and play and feel normal, and that does not work for the COVID response. And so we've had to really spread people out, and we've had to kind of utilize the hotels that have been so generous with their space and their time and their staff, especially at a time when they are also struggling. And so I think that is just a tremendous, showing of the response of Duluth as a community too. And so, to be able to reach survivors, we've relied a lot on technology and teleadvocacy and, supporting through different video conferencing platforms. So still serving the same number of people, but in vastly different ways. And so now that the stay-at-home order has been lifted, we're thankfully starting to see call volumes gradually increase. It's only been a couple of days, but to me that's a really hopeful sign that people are feeling more comfortable and able to begin to reach out for help. And we are so grateful for the leadership of Governor Walz in response to the COVID crisis, because even our partners across the bridge in Superior have had a much different reality, and we feel they're concerned because they have not had quite the same level of leadership that we've been able to enjoy here in Minnesota, and so we're also doing our part to kind of help them as well. So to kind of answer your question, our programs have changed really dramatically, but we feel really fortunate and really lucky to be able to continue to be here and to continue to have our doors open to survivors that need us. And we know that we kind of have a long road ahead, and we're going to have to make some pretty dramatic changes in the future. Even our actual shelter space is going to have to change pretty significantly, and so having some funding opportunities available to look into doing that is going to be critical to our ongoing ability to provide service. And then also, as far as our walk-in services at our resource center location here in downtown Duluth, we've been able to provide emergency services for orders for protection, harassment restraining orders. It had never crossed the mind of our staff to ever close our doors, which I think is an incredible tribute to them. They never once shied away at closing their doors. They're like, well, are you kidding me? No, we're not going to stop providing that service. We have to do that. And so, thinking about how we're going to gradually reopen to full capacity to be able to offer all of those wraparound services is going to be really important too, and that will certainly look different. So I'm going to stop talking because I've talked a lot.
No, I think that actually really said it all, because you just can't shut down. I found this old quote from Paul Wellstone where he said, because as you know, he and Sheila were such leaders and did a lot of work up here on domestic violence, and he said, we can no longer stand by and say it is someone else's problems. What are we waiting for? Too many have spoken with their voices and their lives. So we just cannot forget these victims while we all struggle with the pandemic in so many ways. And we have to remember that when the economy gets worse and people are unemployed and they're stuck in their homes, it gets worse. And we've got to stand up for them. So I want to thank Brittany for her amazing work. All right?
Okay. Brittany, I just have one more question for you.
Okay.
Obviously, the Duluth Police Department has a unique policy.
Oh, yeah.
Always making arrests if there's a call. How's that been? Has it been a blessing during this COVID-19? Whereas other cities obviously might not have that policy?
Yeah, we are so grateful for the Duluth Police Department, and also immensely grateful for our relationship with the Duluth Police Department. And we know that their work has, I cannot even fathom what their work must look like right now. And so their work has also changed so much that their work with us has also changed. But I know that we're always in the front of their minds. And so when they are out in the community doing what they need to do to keep our entire community safe, they are interacting with victims in the way that we have been fortunate enough to work really closely with them to provide training to all of their staff and on an ongoing basis. And so they know how to respond to victims, and they know what we hope and what we expect. And so we do feel really fortunate that we've had a hand in the work that they are doing. And so we do feel really lucky that is a part of what's happening in our community right now. And we do hope that that law enforcement does always remember that when they're out there making those calls, that no matter what is happening in the community, that domestic violence is still very much a real crime, and that they continue to respond with compassion. And we know that they will, and we trust that they will, and we do, for their sake and for ours, look forward to a time when we can kind of get back into the processes that have worked well for us for so many years.
Thanks, everybody. All right.
Great.
Bathroom in here.
Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you,
So great to
everybody.
meet you.
Really appreciate it.